worked with Nick Butler when he was 22 years old. And he worked for me.
Really? What did he do?
Part-time. He worked as a literary escort. When I had authors overflowing in Madison, he was great. So he got to meet a lot of authors and know what not to do on a book tour.
Let's talk a little bit about Nickolas Butler. We're delighted that he took the time to travel here to Wisconsin, to Cedarburg from the northwest side of Wisconsin. He's an author, Wisconsin author, raised in Eau Claire. He went to UW-Madison and the University of Iowa's Writers' Workshop. His first novel, Shotgun Lovesongs, is an international best-selling and prize-winning novel which has been optioned for film development and has been translated into 10 different languages. He has written Beneath the Bonfire, In the Hearts of Men, Little Faith, and Godspeed, and other things. Prior to publishing Shotgun Lovesongs, he worked a long list of jobs, including coffee roaster, liquor store clerk, office manager, hot dog vendor, author escort, meat packer, bed and breakfast manager, telemarketer, and Burger King maintenance man. He's married and lives with his wife and 2 children on 16 acres of land adjacent to a buffalo farm in rural Wisconsin. So I'd like to introduce Nickolas Butler, author of this year's Cedarburg Read Selection, Shotgun Lovesongs.
Think I can lift?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah?
Do it.
Okay.
It'll sound better.
Hello?
Hi.
Hello? Hello? Hello. Good? Okay, first off, congratulations to the winners of the writing prize. Anytime anyone pays you for your writing, that's a good thing and not to be taken lightly. Thank you to Cedarburg for choosing this book as a community reads. This book came out in 2014. There are many thousands of wonderful books that come out every year, and for one reason or another, they just get sort of lost in the shuffle, and people don't find them. It doesn't mean that the book isn't good or great, or that the author isn't good or great. It just means there's a lot of fantastic books coming out every year. To think that people are still discovering this book and enjoying this book almost 10 years later means more to me than you will ever know. And when this book first came out, I didn't really understand even what was happening. I had a lot of imposter syndrome. I am from West Central Wisconsin, where success and wealth and creativity are not virtues. What's a virtue is going to your job every day and working as hard as you can from 9 to 5 or from 8 to 6, or if you're a farmer, all the time, every single day. So I think I just thought, I don't really deserve this, and I haven't really done anything that miraculous. I'm just a normal person. And I realize now, 10 years into this career, that events like this don't happen very often, and I'm intensely grateful. I hope you know that. Like, I hope you can hear it in my voice. That said, it's been almost 10 years since I've had to talk about this novel in sort of a fresh way. So I've been thinking about that. How do I tell this story? And I'm happy to tell this story, but I think in some ways I have to start maybe about 4 years before the novel began. You just heard Jean read the litany of, and I'm sorry, sometimes I might use a curse word. It's not because I'm a bad person. I'm just using the whole panorama of the English language. I had a litany of shitty jobs, as you heard about. I never made any money. And when I was about 28, I was working at a liquor store, Star Liquor, which is on Williamson Avenue, Willie Street in Madison. Fantastic liquor store. And my wife was pregnant with our first child, and we were on state benefits, and we were very close to foreclosure and bankruptcy. And I had applied to grad school the year before, and I'd gotten accepted into nowhere. So I decided I would apply one more year to grad schools and see what happened, and if I didn't have any success, then maybe I had to reconsider my writing dreams, because I was going to be a dad. At about that same time, I'd also had a conversation with myself, because I wasn't proud of being on benefits. I wasn't proud of working at a liquor store. I wasn't proud of being close to bankruptcy. And so I had this kind of conversation with myself. What kind of husband do you want to be? What kind of dad do you want to be? What are you good at? How are you going to work at some place different than this liquor store? And let me say also that I have no judgment about anybody who works at a liquor store, because liquor stores are one of my happy places, okay? So don't mishear me. But that's not what I wanted to do forever. I didn't want to make $8 an hour forever, which is what I was getting paid then. The only thing I could think of that I was any good at was writing. So I started taking workshops to try and become a better writer. And as I told you, the second year I applied to grad schools, one night I'm working at Star Liquor, and one of my buddies says, "Hey Nick," the phone rings, I'm in the back. I can remember exactly where I was in Star Liquor. Foster's, the Australian beer, makes these giant, they call them oil cans of Foster's. They're like, I don't know, an obnoxious amount of Foster's, 16 or 20 ounces. And I was stocking those, and my buddy John says, "Hey, Nick, somebody from the University of Iowa is on the phone. Do you want to take the call?" And I was like, yes! Took the phone, and it was Sam Chang, the director of the Iowa Writers Workshop, saying, "Would you like to come study at Iowa?" And I tried to kind of play it cool, right? Like I had other options. I was like, "Well, you know, I'm waiting to hear from other grad programs." And she's like, "Yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you in the fall," or something like that. Just totally blew me off. So one of the most life-changing moments in my life, and my wife was, had about maybe she was finishing up law school at that point. I'm married to a really fantastic woman who not only had our child while she was in law school, but finished in the top 10 people in her law school class. Genius, okay? So we thought this will be a really fun time in our life. We'll all be in Iowa City together, young family with a baby. My wife loves books as much as I do. She goes to interview at law firms in Iowa City, and they said, "Well, what is bringing you to Iowa City?" And she told them, "Well, my husband just got into the writer's workshop." And they said, "Well, you're not going to stick around." So even though she was a super genius, graduated at the top of her class, she didn't get any job offers to work in Iowa City. But she did have a job offer in Minneapolis. So we all moved to Minneapolis. But every Monday when my wife got done with work, I would drive down to Iowa City, which is about a 4.5-hour drive down I-35, which is basically just a straight southern shot. At 2 years into the program, I could almost just drive blindfolded. And then every Thursday I would drive back to Minneapolis to be with my family. So I figured it out. Over the 2 years that I was at the Iowa Writers Workshop, I spent 32 days of my life in the car. But that meant that I was totally committed to what I was doing, because I knew what my wife was sacrificing for me to be in grad school. She was basically acting as a single mom. I knew what I was sacrificing because I wasn't there with my 1-year-old boy. And I knew that I was sacrificing all this time in the car. This was pre-podcast. There was nothing to do except listen to AM radio, or sometimes in the spring I could tune in WGN and kind of listen to the Cubs game a little or something like that. Also, even though she had a pretty good job as an attorney, we didn't have very much money. So my wife, who's the fiscally responsible one in our marriage, I am not, She helped me find an apartment. I was living with an adjunct professor of English in Iowa City. She had a bedroom in the house, and I had a bedroom in the house. And she had a cat named Trotsky. I'm really allergic to cats, so once I came into the house, I just had to go straight to my bedroom and shut the door because I can't even really be around them. And inside that bedroom that I was renting was one half of my brother-in-law's childhood bunk bed painted cherry red and a white desk that my mother-in-law had given me. That was it. Bunk bed from your 10-year-old days, white desk, folding chair, okay? I'm 31 years old. So I would be depressed a lot of the time. Because I get off the road and that's where I was. It wasn't like I was checking into the Four Seasons. I was in this shitty, depressing room. And I remember I was sitting there in September of 2010 and I was feeling very homesick, very lonely, sad, and I had to write a story for the next deadline for the writer's workshop. And it was late. It was like 10 o'clock. Too late to really begin starting to write like a short story. But I just kind of channeled all those feelings into this long short story about a group of friends that were living in a rural community that looks like many of the rural communities near Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And they were all at this point in their lives in their late 20s or early 30s, and I think many of you can relate to this, where it feels like all summer long, all you do is go to the weddings of your friends and your cousins. That is all you do. Everybody's getting married at the same time. That's where I was anyway. And I would always be sitting in the back of these Lutheran churches, taking notes on various things like some bridegroom's butterfly tattoo on her shoulder that was like maybe 3 times too big and sort of poorly done, or which church had the best coffee, who had bad coffee, who stands up to, sing a solo and like they have no business singing the solo. I had all these details down totally. So I thought, well, maybe that's what I'll write about. I'll just write this short story about, friends and that kind of strange time in your life in your late 20s and early 30s where some of your friends have found a measure of success and some of them really haven't at all. Like in my late 20s before the Iowa Writers Workshop, I would run into my friends from high school on Water Street in Eau Claire and I'd be like, oh my God, Eric Buckley, it's fantastic to see you. What are you doing? And Eric Buckley in high school was one of my friends and a very nice man. But I would have never predicted he was a dentist making $500,000 a year in Southern Florida. And he would say, oh, it's so good to see you. What are you doing? And I'd be like, I'm going to work at a liquor store. And I think over time, I find that some of that sort of washes out. Like it comes out in the laundry, right? But at that time in your life, it feels really acute. Turned it in. And my colleagues were like super positive about it. They thought, we understand your pride in Wisconsin. We can see these small towns. We know these characters. Just keep doing what you're doing. You hear like a lot of bad stories about the Iowa Writers Workshop and how psychologically fraught it is. And some of that is true. But when it's really good, it's really good. And my friends and colleagues were so generous. They were just like, keep going with this. But I thought I was kind of like an artiste. I was like, I'm just going to write short stories and novellas. Short stories and novellas, no novels for me. During the first year of Iowa, they have agents that come in to meet the writers, kind of like scouting. I like to liken it to college sports because I'm not an athlete, but it's it's like agents come there to find new talent. And I would be meeting with these agents face to face, which is miraculous from a kid from Eau Claire. Like you think like, what access am I ever going to have to a New York City agent? Well, here I am sitting across from them. But what I realized was that the dynamic of those moments was really psychologically unhealthy. It was like being on a date with somebody who really wanted nothing to do with you and you wanted everything to do with them. And so I kind of came in a little desperate and sweaty, and I don't think that was attractive. And I got denied like maybe 12 times. And so at the end of that first year, I thought, I can't do that anymore. I can't be that close to having an agent and fail. I can't handle it psychologically. So I didn't meet with him anymore. And I just started working on my short stories. Nobody gave me this advice at Iowa. I was just like, all I can control is my own writing. So I started sending out my short stories super aggressively to literary journals and, across the spectrum of quality. And in one summer, I had 3 of those short stories, which are in Beneath the Bonfire there, published. And all of a sudden, agents started contacting me. And I signed with a guy named Rob McQuilkin. He loved my short stories. He's like, we'll publish these. I'll sell this collection for you and we'll publish these. But do you have anything that could be a novel? Part of the reason why he was asking this is that nobody really buys short story collections. So as an agent, what they want to know is that you have a novel. I said, well, I got this chapter kind of about a bunch of people going to weddings. And he's like, well, send it to me. So I sent it to him. He's like, this is fantastic. Why don't you turn it into a novel? I'm like, I don't really know how to write a novel. And he's like, well, yeah, you do. Just figure it out. You know how to write characters. You know how to write plot and action. Just figure it out. So the second year I was at Iowa, I didn't show him anything I was working on except one story about 2 buddies going to a bar and getting drunk and finding a jar of pickled eggs. Okay, and that was based on a true story. So remember how I told you that I would drive back and forth between Iowa City and Minneapolis? Well, one of the reasons why we were successful as a family at that time is that my brother-in-law moved in with us, and he could pick up our young son from daycare and take him back to our apartment. We just let my brother-in-law stay with us for free if he would do that. He's about 23. He's working in Minneapolis, young professional, first young professional job of his life, so all his colleagues are early 20s. And they'd go out every Friday drinking. So one day I get off the road from Iowa, it's 9:30. My wife is asleep, our baby's asleep. It's just me and my brother-in-law up drinking beers, and he's like, I got a story for you. Anytime anyone says they have a story, I tune right in. Like, to the point where now, at this point in my career, if you have a story and you want to tell it to me, I just say, stop. You understand that, like, what you're doing right now is a criminal talking to a cop about something. Like, I am listening intently, and I will copy your story, okay? But at that time, he says, I got this story for you. So I'm like, okay. So he's out at this work function, and there's a young lady that he's working with who has the worst taste in men ever. Terrible taste in men. And she starts talking about this ex-boyfriend of hers. And he lives in a small town in Minnesota. And he goes to this bar one afternoon. And he's looking across the bar. And there's a giant jar of pickles. And he's drinking and he's drinking. And towards late afternoon, he gets the idea that he thinks it would be a good idea to steal the jar of pickles. I don't know why, but as I told you, he's not a real winner, right? So he waits and waits until the bartender's distracted. And then he sneaks behind the bar and he steals the jar of pickles. He goes out onto Main Street. He takes the lid of the giant jar of pickles. I mean, it's big. Like, he's got to hold it like this. Takes the jar, discards it. And oncoming traffic is coming. And he takes a pickle out and he throws it at somebody's windshield, and he hits it and they drive off, like they honk or whatever. He throws another one, they drive off. He throws a third one, he hits this SUV, they slam on the brake, get out of the car, and shoot the guy in the leg. True story. At the time, this guy, who's not such a winner, is morbidly obese. And because he doesn't have a job, he doesn't have any insurance, and he might have a checkered criminal past. And he stole something from a bar. So he's not going to the doctor and he's not going to the police. He decides the prudent idea is to just go back to his apartment and see what happens. And over time, this gunshot wound heals. Well, then he decides that what he wants to do is lose a bunch of weight. So for the next year, he takes up jogging, and the fat is melting off his body. But as the fat is melting off the body, the slug of the bullet that went into his body is getting closer to the surface of his skin, and it's getting very itchy. So one, 4th of July weekend or Labor Day weekend, he says to the girl, remember the girl who's telling the story to my brother-in-law, he says to the girl, I got a project for you. And they're drinking, they're having a barbecue, and there's a pot on his stove, boiling water. He drops some pliers in it, and then he's like, meet me in the bathroom. He goes into the bathtub, and he's like, we need to get this out of my leg. So they've cauterized some sort of knife or scalpel. She cuts open his leg. She gets the pliers. She can find the slug of the bullet, and she gets it, and she's pulling on it like this. But there's scar tissue built up around the bullet. And so she's just hurting the guy, and he's bleeding everywhere. So they decide, let's go to the ER. So they go to the ER. He goes to admitting, and he's like, I've been shot. And they're like, you haven't been shot. We have a police scanner. We would know if you'd been shot. And he's like, I've been shot. Take an X-ray. So they take an X-ray. Sure enough, there's the slug of the bullet. They remove the bullet. And then weeks later, she breaks up with this guy. And then my brother-in-law is telling me the story, and I'm like, holy shit, that's an insane story. I don't know if it's high literature, but I'm going to put it into a chapter in this book. So that's the only other chapter that I showed my colleagues. They thought it was crazy, but they were pretty nice about it. So then at the end of 2012, I had this novel together. I just fooled myself into writing a novel by writing all these chapters from different perspectives. And because the University of Iowa has free printing, I would print out these chapters all the time. I'd spread them out on my dining room table, and I'd be like, okay, yep, we got a good rhythm here. Oh, we got a hole here. We got to write a chapter there. Okay, well, we got a hole here. We'll fill that. Then I sent it to my agent in June. And if you saw the amount of edits that this man put on that first manuscript, you would think I had zero talent at all. So much red ink. Just incredible. But I was 100% committed to this book, right? Because I had done the 2 years of driving. I knew what my wife had sacrificed. I was like, yep, let's do it. So I'd email him the book on Friday. He'd email me the edits on Monday. I'd work on them through the week, get them back to him on Friday. He'd email them back to me on Monday. The red ink is only marginally decreasing. Sometimes I'd be laying in bed and I would be like, I made that edit already. You're going back to the first draft. Eventually we get to August and I was like, I can't do it anymore. I hate this book. I hate these characters. I hate it all. And he's like, okay, I think we're ready to sell the book. And so I think maybe we waited till September because we were trying to time it for the Frankfurt Book Festival, which in publishing is a very big deal. If you can generate excitement around the sale of your book before Frankfurt, and then Frankfurt happens, you can capitalize on all the different international publishers getting excited about your book. So on a Friday in late September, I can't remember anymore, he sends it out to New York City. And my friend Marcus Burke, who was my best friend at Iowa, said, well, what do you think is going to happen? And I said, I don't know, Marcus. I think the book will sell, but it could be 5,000 or it could be 500,000. I don't really know. Well, on Monday morning, there was so much interest in New York that the only way we could sell it was an auction, which is your preferred way of selling a novel. And we set up interviews with about 12 different editors in New York City, and which was very surreal. I would talk to them and just be like, what have you seen? I can't believe this is happening. And then the book sold in the US, and then it sold in England, Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Denmark, Norway, Israel. The film rights sold to Fox Searchlight. And I went from being a guy who'd never had a good job in my life to like, what best way I can describe it is I woke up into a dream. This was my dream. This is always what I wanted to do. I always thought writers were the coolest people. Other than like Green Bay Packers, writers are the coolest people. And it just changed our life completely. So I thought maybe I'd read you a chapter of this, and then if you have questions, I'm happy to answer questions. I can talk about the new book, Godspeed, too. Whatever you want to talk about, I'm happy to. So thank you very much for coming out tonight. Oh, I'll also tell you that this particular chapter, what time is it? Am I running long? Am I okay? Am I boring you? 7:30. Okay, I think that's okay. This chapter came out of real life too. One of my best friends lives up in the Bayfield area, Washburn Bayfield area. And after he first moved up there, we heard about this square dance that was going on. And being true Wisconsinites, of course, we showed up at the square dance with copious amounts of alcohol, only to realize that it was a dry dance. And we'd never really heard of that, like a dry dance. Wouldn't you want to be drunk? But I don't know if any of you have been to a square dance before. It is so much fun. And you just feel like you're part of a community, and everyone is sweating, and everyone looks ridiculous, and I loved it. So that's where this came from. The whole town came out, and there were not enough folding chairs, not enough room for the bystanders and gawkers to stand in. Many stood outside the mill in the cold, peering in through windows already fogging with heat. Others gathered in the mill's basement, which Kip had stunningly transformed into a dance hall of rustic elegance. Where once dead mice and rats had floated in 6 inches of tepid water, now the huge stone space glowed a golden yellow beneath white Christmas lights and candles. You would have thought it was some kind of royal wedding, 2 houses of the American Middle Western aristocracy merging. As big as Kip's wedding was, Ronnie's surpassed it by far. And perhaps due in part to the prior evening's excitement, because despite frostbitten fingers and a bright red nose, Ronnie insisted on getting married on schedule. I had been among those urging him to lie in bed and recuperate. "Ronnie," I said, "Lucy will understand. I promise. You can get married next week, next month, next year. This is crazy. You're lucky to be alive." For her part, Lucy sat so close in his hospital bed that she may as well have crawled into Ronnie's lap. She nodded her head. "Lee's right, baby. I ain't never going to leave you. Never, ever. Just get me out of here around noon," Ronnie said seriously. "I'll stay here till noon. I'll rest that long, but that's it." He pointed a finger at me, at Henry, at Eddie, Kip, and the Gurus. "I'll sign the goddamn paperwork myself if I have to. I ain't no invalid." At noon, he was taken by a wheelchair to the vestibule of the Sacred Heart Hospital, where Lucy's aged Dodge Neon sat idling. His hands and feet were heavily bandaged, and when he rose wobbly out of the chair, we raced to support him. "Give me a break," he said. "I ain't dead. I've been worse off than this. Just get me back to my place. Just get me the hell into my tuxedo." I rode in the back seat of the Neon while Lucy drove, her protruding belly rubbing the steering wheel, nervously glancing over at Ronnie from time to time, holding his hand in hers, asking if the heat was too much. He waved her off, pretended to inspect the world outside the window. "Baby," she said softly, "baby, what were you doing out there last night?" "I don't know," he began, his voice trailing off. "Baby?" From the back seat, I watched them, their faces, her fingers and his hair, the road before us. "I just got lost, is all." "But what were you even doing out there? Why weren't you home?" "I don't know, lost track of time, I guess, and then I went to take a leak, and when I turned around, the bar had moved or something." Ronnie laughed, turned around to me. "Shit, maybe the bar got lost, too." I smiled at him. "Baby," Lucy said, "you're going to be a dad now. You know that? You're going to be somebody's dad." There ain't any more getting lost, all right? She'd begun crying now and pulled the car to the shoulder of the road. You stick by me, you hear? We stick together now. He looked at her. I wanted to be with you, he said, but I thought we wasn't supposed to be together the night before. Tradition or whatnot. She rubbed his face, his cheeks with her hands. After tonight, you don't never have to worry about that no more. They kissed each other, straining against their seatbelts. You know, I could drive us the rest of the way back, I said. And without saying a word, they both unbuckled their seatbelts, stepped out of the car, let me move into the driver's seat, and then hurried into the back seat where they spent the final miles holding each other as tightly as possible. I watched in the rear view for a few seconds before aiming my eyes away. The ceremony itself was held in what would have been the main warehouse of the old mill, a cavernous room that still smelled vaguely of malt. There was no church organ, obviously, but Kip had spared no expense with the sound system, with a professional DJ to handle the soundtrack. I stood at the front of the room beside Ronnie, holding the wedding bands that had come to him through his grandmother. His grandfather's old ring, the one Ronnie had been wearing for weeks, almost like the string a forgetful person ties around his finger as a reminder. And hers, this ring I rubbed between my thumb and index finger within the confines of my pocket, felt the softness of the gold, imagined all the places the ring had gone, all the fingers and objects it had touched. I felt the little diamond. This was the wedding ring of poor people, of middle-class America. It was a promise of things to come, not some gaudy Galleria ring, some designer monstrosity like the one I bought for Chloe. Waiting up front as well was Lucy's younger sister, the maid of honor, a girl not yet 21 years of age. Her makeup already ruined with tears, she clutched a bouquet of flowers so severely that from several feet away I could hear individual stems breaking, could smell something that I imagined to be chlorophyll, the smell of freshly cut grass or shrubs. I imagined green stains on her palms and possibly the puncture marks of thorns. It was a nice traditional Lutheran wedding. The same worn-out Bible verses you always hear at Midwestern weddings. The pastor spoke about time and patience and forgiveness, his voice warm and tired sounding. Lucy's sister pulled herself together long enough to sing a shaky rendition of I Will Always Love You, a selection that few of my own friends at the highest echelons of American popular music would have attempted on their best days. But thankfully, she veered toward a more subdued Dolly Parton rendering rather than going for a full-throated imitation of Whitney Houston. Ronnie and Lucy listened to the pastor's words with rapt attention, their voices hushed, serious when it came time to exchange vows, spoken with the right amount of thought and emotion. Ronnie looked away from his bride just once in order to reach back toward me for the ring. After their kiss, a cheer rose up in the mill that was the loudest sound I'd ever heard in Little Wing, and from the little Lutheran church off Main Street, you could hear the peal of bells tolling. Even with his bandages, Ronnie joined Lucy in shaking everyone's hand, and then the hors d'oeuvres, dinner, and finally the party. Most of the women had lost their heels, and the men were sweaty as hockey players with neckties knotted around their foreheads and plastic cups full of water and ice cubes. It was a dry wedding, no booze allowed, but no one seemed to care. The whole damn town was out on the dance floor, it seemed, and they were giving it, leaving it all out there, letting it all hang out. Eddie on the floor doing the worm, and Henry displaying an especially prominent white man's overbite, clapping his hands to music you damn well know he'd never heard before, but it's got a beat. You can move to it. And the groom, Ronnie Taylor, looking like an original king of disco with the kind of lithe body that might have given John Travolta pause. He was out there, cowboy hat on his head, hands perched snug on that belt buckle, kicking and strutting in new alligator cowboy boots and dancing with his pregnant bride, a woman who came equipped with her own set of moves. And even pregnant as she was, she moved well, showing her husband moves that promised much more than what was appropriate for public consumption. And then the whole town was surrounding them, forming a kind of huge circle, and everyone clapping, everyone cheering for those two unlikely newlyweds, cheering with the kind of unrestraint that builds in a community buried by snow and kept mostly without sunlight from Thanksgiving to Easter. Children were there, up way past their bedtimes, out on the dance floor and moving exactly how the music told them to, moving without a care or inhibition in the world, children making sorties to the tables where the sheet cakes waited melting, running sugary fingers through thick frosting, children guzzling soda, rubbing their sleepy eyes and going back for more, dancing in circles, dancing with their parents, teenagers sulking in the corners, checking their phones, looking up, wanting to join the action, but embarrassed to. Look, there are their parents dancing, even grinding in ways that make the teenagers blush, moving in ways that made the teenagers say, "Oh my God." Teenagers sneaking off for cigarettes stolen from others' purses, from fathers' jacket pockets, smoking in the bathrooms or out by the train tracks, kissing in the quiet spaces of the old mill, eyes big, eyes full of love and wonder and new ancient sensations, and the old people sitting in chairs, watching, clapping, and in some cases sitting almost catatonic, motionless, only the smallest of smiles cracked on their wrinkled faces. Some of the old women rising to join the dance floor fun, but the old men shaking their heads, no, no, no. Crossing their arms and crossing their legs, doing everything but sitting on the floor and locking arms together in solidarity. Didn't dance back then, and I sure as hell ain't gonna start now. And there was Kip, leaning against a wall, making a plastic cup of ice cubes sound like a half dozen dice, a strange look on his face, a happy look, a look of accomplishment. He didn't see me, but I saw him from where I was out dancing with our friends. I stepped away from the wild ruckus of it all and went over to him, wiping the sweat away from my face. What I needed was a roll of paper towels, a cold shower, but I was having too much fun. Everyone was. Somehow the son of a bitch had pulled it off, had brought everyone together. He saw me coming and stood up straight as if I were a teacher coming to correct his posture. I saw his jaws crush an ice cube. He nodded, extended his hand almost sternly. "Leland," he said. I noticed he employed my full name, Leland, not Lee, not Buddy. That's where we were at, he and I. "Come on outside," I said. "Let's take a walk. I'll buy you a beer." He shook his head. "Nah, I really ought to stay here." "Oh, come on," I said. I put a hand on his shoulder, felt his body tense up. "Shit, man. Let me say that I'm sorry, all right?" He looked at me for a second without saying a word and then moved away from the dance floor. We went out into the cold together like two men emerging from a sauna, plumes of steam rising off our heads like columns of smoke. There were others out in the winter night too, standing outside the mill, smoking cigarettes, looking at the stars, catching their breath. They nodded their heads in our direction, though I'll say this, when they nodded, it was clear to me that they were nodding at Kip and not so much at me. What he had done was a rare thing, a good thing, the kind of thing that I suspect has been lost in America. Whole towns, whole communities getting together to celebrate, to have fun, no politics, no business, no Robert's rules. Once a long time ago, when I was first starting out, I was invited to a square dance up on Lake Superior in one of those small towns that seem to have lost their reason to persist. No downtown, no businesses, no working poor to railroad tracks, and yet, at 7 o'clock on a Friday night, 100 people came out of the hills and forests and down to the old town hall, and I was the opening act for a bluegrass band and a contra dance caller. There was a potluck and bowls of punch and Kool-Aid and coolers of soda, and someone turned the lights down low, and I played my guitar for an hour or so, played some Springsteen covers too, and they were polite and clapped, and no one's cell phone went off, and no one was distracted or talking. That was the only thing in town at that very moment. After the set was finished, the bluegrass band took to the stage. The fiddle players rosined their bows, and the piano player lightly touched the keys, and the bass player made his big fat strings talk in a deep, low voice, and then they exploded. And the music they played was like a giant bucket of water poured over a great tree fully leaved, the notes dividing and dispersing themselves down, gradually growing smaller and smaller, joyously running, bouncing, flowing down, down, down from leaf to leaf, as if racing one another. A one-child family suddenly multiplied 1,000, 1,000,000 times over, each rivulet, each bead, each tear, a drop of sunlight and glee. And everyone started dancing, and soon the town hall was pungent with body odor, deafening with laughter, dense with the smell of wet wool and feet, and the whole town embraced me, literally embraced me, swung me into their square dances, and taught me their promenades and their steps and their claps and their calls. And I have to say that was the first time I ever understood what America was or could be. And the second night was the night of Ronnie Taylor's wedding in Kip Cunningham's lovingly restored mill. America, I think, is about poor people playing music and poor people sharing food and poor people dancing, even when everything else in their lives is so desperate and so dismal that it doesn't seem there should be any room for any music, any extra food, or any extra energy for dancing. And people can say that I'm wrong, that we're a puritanical people, an evangelical people, a selfish people, but I don't believe that. I don't want to believe that. Clearly, whoever wasn't at the mill was at the VFW. The place was packed. Kip and I elbowed into the bar, and no sooner had we got through the door than someone pressed cold glasses of tap beer into our hands, and we stood close together, the door ajar, very cold air coming in, but feeling delicious all the same. Waylon Jennings on the old Wurlitzer. "You did good tonight," I hollered into Kip's right ear. "That's a hell of a party back there." Kip nodded his thank you, but said nothing, sipped his beer. He had changed, I saw, or maybe it was just my perception of him that had changed. Something was different. The Kip I'd always known or thought I had known would have made some self-aggrandizing speech, would have made everyone feel obliged to patronize his business, would have even passed the hat. But he had done none of those things. "Hey," I screamed, "I want us to be good, you know. I want us to be..." I stopped, glanced at my wedding shoes. "I want us to be friends." He leaned in my ear. "Come on," he said, "finish that beer. Let's get back to the party." He slugged his back, set the tap glass down beside the frosted window pane where the warmth of the neon lights seemed to soften the ice there. I followed him back out into the cold. The night sky was perfect. The sound of music drifting through Main Street, car horns honking as they drifted away out into the countryside, laughter. "I figure that I can keep this thing afloat about another year before it sinks," Kip said. He walked with his hands in his pocket. He looked at me, not sadly but firmly, and I understood. Turns out I bit off a little more than I could chew. He blew out a cloud of steam, shrugged his shoulders. "I'm not asking for your help. This damn mill has failed before, and it'll probably fail again." I walked along beside him, my sweat growing cold in the chill. The music back at the party was slowing, and I pictured couples moving in close, holding hands, women resting their heads on their partner's shoulders. I thought of Beth, and then shook that thought away. Funny that I think of Beth just then and not Chloe. "How much do you need?" I asked. He shrugged again. "Christly, I'm up to my ass. Even if business picks up, I don't think I can keep up with the payments, you understand? Renovating everything was one thing. Revenue was another." He kicked at a chunk of ice, waved his hand. "Forget I said anything. You probably got enough people looking for handouts. Let's just have some fucking fun." He picked up his pace, moved ahead of me, shook the hands of the Guru brothers, out leaning against the side of the mill, smoking cigarettes. They nodded at me. Back in the basement of the mill, everyone was slow dancing, and there was Ronnie and Lucy orbiting together, turning slow circles, her big, hard belly pressed against his very lean, narrow one. I watched them, watched Henry and Beth dancing, watched Felicia find Kip and drag him out to the floor, watched other wallflowers peeled away to join the rest of Little Wing, but no one came for me. And there was no bar there to retreat to and no fancy phone to hide my face in. Nothing but the lights of the disco ball, Louis Armstrong's sweet growl, and the desire not to be alone. "Hey," a voice said, "you want to dance?" I looked over to find a woman standing beside me. Her face was covered in freckles, and I could see that she had long red hair. Her dress was pink, her shoulders very pale. "Hi," I said, "I'm Lee." "Rachel," she said, shaking my hand. "I'm Lucy's cousin from Milwaukee." I pointed to Ronnie's Lucy cousins. She bit her lip, nodded. "So, you want to dance?" "Yeah, sure." She led me out toward my friends, and we danced, and for a while I wasn't alone at all anymore, and I stared at Rachel's shoulders, and sometimes the light of the disco ball sprinkled a confetti kind of light on her skin, and the only thing I wanted to do was to touch those freckles, each and every one, the rest of my life. I slept in her motel that night, but in the morning when I invited her back to my place for pancakes and coffee, She just smiled in a winsome sort of way, kissed me on the forehead, and said, "I'm going to take a shower." And so I drove home through Little Wing, where the Sunday morning streets were quiet, a few cars already in the parking lot of the Lutheran church, and a few more parked out in front of the Coffee Cup Cafe. When I got home, I called about buying 2 tickets to Hawaii. Then I fell asleep on the couch, holding a pillow against my chest. By the time I woke up, it was already dark again, and spring a long time coming. Thank you. I will say that I just don't think there's enough American literature that focuses on the delight of a very cold glass of beer. Does anybody have any questions, or do we just look? Yes. Yes.
I'm curious because you said that you expected to sell, or your agent expected that you would sell between 5 and 500,000 copies, and then suddenly found yourself with an enormous demand. Do you know what would you attribute it to? What happened between point A and point B?
Yeah.
How did you come? What the process was?
The question was basically like, and I'm going to correct your question just a little bit. The question was, I had said I expected the book to sell for between $5,000 and $500,000, and why did it? I never told you what it sold for,
I
but
thought it was number of copies, but
no.
okay.
No, my friend asked me, how much money do you think the book is going to sell for? And I said, I don't know, this or that. No, I mean, I think growing up in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, there was no example of literary success. That is not to say that Eau Claire doesn't have good writers and didn't have good writers when I was growing up, but there was no one that was publishing, I don't know how to say this and not, I'll just say it. There's nobody that was in Eau Claire at that time that was publishing what I'm publishing now, okay? And there was no Justin Vernon at that time, because of course he's a year younger than me. So I think I just came into the process with a real Midwestern sense of, expect, what's the expression? Expect the worst, pray for the best, something like that. I was like, well, surely, we'll be lucky if the book sells. But that's just like, that's my Midwestern mentality of like, I don't tell people about I told you guys the good story of this book, but that's not something that I can talk about in Eau Claire because I'm from Eau Claire. So everybody in Eau Claire just thinks I'm Nick from Eau Claire, like they don't treat me any differently. And that's how my life is, you know what I mean? Did I answer your question?
In part.
Okay.
But what I'm curious about is how do you feel, what happened that caused, for example, Japan to buy the book? I mean, is it just very exotic to go in? Is it so unexpected? Is it such a cultural shock for them to find out what Midwest America is like?
Okay, so the question was, why did the book sell in such a good way, I think?
It's such a good way in so many different forms.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sold in Japan and it's sold in Germany and
Yes.
almost from the get-go.
Yes. So part of the way to answer that is I have a very good agent, and he just orchestrated the sale of this book perfectly. He couldn't have done any better. He did a wondrous job, and I've had the same literary agent all the way throughout, but I also have a Hollywood agent who represents like my books in Hollywood, trying to sell the rights to
Movies.
Yes. I've had bad Hollywood agents that just were, one of them had a cocaine problem. One of them, one of them just wasn't much of a salesperson. So this was a case of having a fantastic agent who just sold the book really well. I think 10 years ago when this book came out, I wasn't able to really talk about what I had done well with the book. But I think what I did well with the book, in hindsight, is that it's about friendship, and it's about love, and it's about family, and it's about community. And so no matter what is happening in politics or the world at large, those things are always attractive to readers.
Universal.
Yes. Like, this, one of the most wonderful, unexpected surprises of my life is that this book is huge in Spain. It's like in its 9th printing in Spain. It's the best-selling book that my Spanish publisher has ever put out. And when I go to a reading in Spain, every room is full. And it's full of like 20-somethings and teenagers, and they're super excited about it. And I think, well, how the hell can that be? What, you know? But I think what they're responding to is the same thing that we respond to in Wisconsin. Like, they don't know what Wisconsin's like, but they do know what it's like to have friends and to lose your friends and to be lonely for your friends. And that's what the book did well, I think. I hope. Also, I was super naive. I didn't know what I was doing, which is a great place for a writer. I just was like, this was a Hail Mary, you know? I just put everything I had into it. Was there a hand over here? Yes.
What are some of like the authors or the voices or the styles that form your work, or like some inspirations other than like what you've taken from your own life for Shotgun Lovesongs?
Yeah. Well, the question was about writing inspiration specifically. Well, I mean, one of my favorite writers, I was talking about him earlier with my friend Mary tonight, is Jim Harrison, who passed away a couple of years ago. But Jim Harrison was from the UP in Michigan. He wrote almost always about nature or food or sex. He really liked sex a lot. And he was from a small place in the world. And what was important to me about Jim Harrison wasn't really his literary voice, but the fact that he came from an unlikely place. You know what I mean? Like, there's something really powerful about reading a book, and then that book mentions, like, let's just say the Bodega Bar in La Crosse, and you're like, oh my God, I've been there. It's a real place. Therefore, I am a real person, you know? And he would do that. He'd write about the UP in a way where I was like, wow, if this guy can do it, maybe I can do it, you know? So he was important. Rick Bass, older writers like Steinbeck and Hemingway when I was just getting into things, Annie Proulx, Toni Morrison, Cormac McCarthy. Yeah. Yes?
Nick, besides being brilliant, you seem like kind of a regular guy.
I'll take that as a compliment, I guess.
You're at like an event like this, or even just in your hometown, you ever get sort of cornered or accosted by someone with a great idea for like a character, like a super cool small town mayor. but do you ever get people with just quirky plot lines and, you know? Or even trying to kind of weasel their way into one of your books or stories?
Well, I think, first off, there is no real such thing as literary fame, because most people don't. There's a startling statistic out there, a sad statistic that I think, like, I can't remember what the number is, whether it's 99% or 90%. We might have a teacher in the room that can verify this. Most people after they graduate high school never read a book again. It's a huge number of our country. Never read a book again. So I always tell people, like, look, Stephen King could come through the door right now, and most people in a normal room would be like, who's that goofy looking guy? But they wouldn't know who he was, or Danielle Steele, or whoever it was. Just think of some massive writer that you hold in high regard. Most people have no idea who that is. So I think in my hometown, very few people even know who I am, which is just fine. Why would I want them to know? You know, one time I was sitting at a bar waiting for a buddy of mine to show up, and Justin Vernon came in. And I love seeing Vernon because we were acquainted in high school, and I love his music, and he's a nice man too. So I said, well, you want to join me? And we sat at the bar and talked for 4 hours. And I had thought that in Eau Claire no one would bother him, you know, because he was at a bar where he's like well known as a patron. And over the course of those 4 hours, I bet no less than 6 people came up to him and ask the kind of questions that you're asking. Not your question, but when you ask about people like asking awkward questions, they were like, oh, your music means so much to me, and how is he supposed to respond to that? He's just there having a beer, you know, like, so all just to say, if you're an actor, people are excited about that. And if you're a politician, maybe they're excited about that. If you're a musician, they're really excited about that. If you're like a packer, they're really excited about that. By the time you get to like professional ice skaters and soccer players and TV food personalities, like writers are way down here. Way down there. Nobody cares at all. So nobody bothers me ever, which is great. Yes?
After your wonderful presentation is an audio book, you know, of any of your presently printed books on the menu coming up?
They're all on audiobook.
Oh, they are?
Yeah. I don't read them, but they're all on audiobook. Shotgun Lovesongs has I don't know if anybody's listened to that on audio, but it's got 5 different narrators. It won like some pretty prestigious prizes for audiobooks. I've never listened to it because like, wouldn't that be weird if I was just in my car listening to my own audiobook? But then because I live in the same town as my mom pulls up to me at the intersection, oh, what are you listening to? And I'm like, nothing. But yeah.
Okay, I need to know why Lee was so stupid to say something, and also do you ever think that the two of them ever got to be friends again?
Well, I think he has to say something stupid in the same way that...
Not stupid, he didn't say something.
Yeah.
Why did he open his mouth? That was my
Well, they're stoned at the time, aren't they?
Yeah.
So that explains it. Also, like, the plot just needed that, right? Like, sometimes when you're telling a story, I'm not drawing a line between this book and Moby Dick, but like, a person could ask themselves, really? You're going after one whale? Like the whole world, you're going after one whale? That doesn't make any sense. Like if you're the kind of reader who's like, this is not possible, you should be out of Moby Dick by page 1, right? But that's what the book needs to succeed as a book, so you follow along. I have been working on a sequel for this book for many years, and I'm like maybe half done. I just kind of toil away at it because I want it to be perfect. I wouldn't want to put it out if it wasn't perfect. And in the sequel, they're friends.
Okay.
Yeah. They're friends, and everything goes back to the way that it was. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
On the technology front, ChatGPT and all the stuff that the writers write with Hollywood, what are your thoughts on what's happening with AI as a writer today?
I really don't know anything about, I'll respond this way. The notion, so you can go into that whole search thing, and AI has used 4 of my books to teach AI how to write fiction, which, let me tell you something, I've been very fortunate in my career, but you heard me, I had to drive for 2 years back and forth, and I know it's like sort of funny, but to me it's actually not funny. That was time that I spent away from my wife when we could have gotten a divorce, right? Time I didn't have with my son. I spent that time to learn how to become a better writer, to produce this book. And the fact that I can say some really bad words right now. Some stranger just thought it was okay to plug my books into some program. Excuse me? What is that worth to me? I don't know what that lawsuit's going to look like, but it is not going to be enough money for me, that, to me, that's worth millions of dollars, That's what I think about it. The one thing that I don't, thanks. Yeah, I think younger people, I haven't noticed my kids doing this, but I've noticed other kids doing this. And it's probably not kids, it's probably everyone. They're sort of experimenting with AI like it's a toy, like we'll just ask it stuff and we'll just see. I don't ever do that. I don't think this is funny. I don't think it's a toy. I think it's like we know in our heads intellectually that this is a helpful toy, but we haven't computed what it means for our future. So why would I use it like a toy? Why would I encourage my kids to use it like a toy? It is stolen from our family. You know what I mean? Really stolen from my family. The reason why I don't think AI technology can write fiction on the level that a human has is that when I was starting my career, I would have resisted the notion that I was, that something magical was happening with my art. I was so Midwestern that I would have thought, nope, this is just a craft. I just learned a craft and I read a lot of books and this is how this stuff is coming out. Nowadays, I think, you know what? There are days where I am listening, I'm really listening to everyone. I'm listening to their stories. I'm trying to understand how people feel, and I am processing all of that. And sometimes even with that and my craft, something happens when I'm sitting at the typewriter, or not the typewriter, I don't have a typewriter, when I'm sitting at the computer that I can't account for. Something weird and magical happens that I don't have any understanding of, and I don't know how AI can account for that. I hope it can account for that. But also, I'm a member of a community, right? I'm a member of your community in as much as we're all Wisconsinites. So be careful about the products you consume. Would you rather, maybe you think I'm a goofball after tonight. Maybe, I don't know. But I would rather support somebody like me or Michael Perry than support Google. Yes?
Did Justin Vernon comment on your book, or is he think that's his character, or whatever happened with that?
Vernon is so cool that I was really, so here, this is the God's honest truth. When I was writing the book, I never really considered him because I thought his story was my story, in as much as he's from Eau Claire. He's from Eau Claire Memorial. The story that we all celebrated about that first album, that was my story too, as somebody from Eau Claire, and we were all really proud of him. So I thought this book was a celebration of my community and in some ways of him. I never really considered that it would get published. Otherwise, I might have situated it in Albuquerque or Duluth or something like that, right? After it sold, I really freaked out. It was actually the lowest point in my whole life. I wasn't sleeping very well. I would get on the internet and read about how much my book had sold for and what people thought about it and how they thought I was ripping off his story, which freaked me out because the only place I ever wanted to live was Eau Claire, where I'm from. Vernon and I have many mutual friends, and many of them said, don't worry about it. He's not much of a reader. But his parents got in touch with me, and they really liked the book. And I hung out with his dad. His mom came to at least one of my readings. And it's been great. He's been really graceful. His parents have been graceful. I guess they could have sued me. I don't think they would have won, but that, people sue all the time for stupid reasons. But he wasn't. He was really great. And he's a good person. Like in high school, he was the guy who was talented musically and popular and charismatic, and he could have been mean to people, but he was the opposite. He was like, if he saw somebody getting picked on, he would write it, So I always try to tell people that, like, he's a really cool guy. Anybody else? Yes?
A number of years ago, you were here, or when you were in Shorewood, and we heard you speak, and you talked about the pressure of the decision to kill a character or keep them alive. And I was curious, as you continued writing, that thought process stuck with you in terms of needing to make decisions as you create these people.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. The question was basically about, if you read this book, you know there's a moment where I could kill a character and I don't. And I think I must have talked about that at show. I remember that event. It was lovely. How do I think about that sort of philosophy moving forward in my writing? My fourth book, Little Faith, is based on a true story about an 11-year-old girl who died outside of Wausau of complications of diabetes because her parents were praying for her rather than taking her to the hospital. She died of dehydration. So when I was writing that book, there's a character that's sort of modeled after her, and there's another character who's dying of terminal cancer. And if you read that book, there's some readers that hate the ending to the point where they reach out to me in their spare time on social media and tell me how much they hate the ending. And I'll say, and it's basically because it's sort of unresolved. And the reason why it's unresolved is because the characters are not just a lowercase character to me. Those are my imaginary friends that are based on real people that I've spent years thinking about and months at the computer describing, and it's hard to kill them. Really hard. And I could have, I knew what that looked like, but I didn't want to do it. So I figured out a way in storytelling to kind of get around that. But if you're the kind of person who needs like resolution in your story, that probably drove you crazy, you know? But I explained to people that, like, look, the way that you might expect resolution to take place in a novel is not consistent with how life moves. Like, if we were writing a novel or a short story about tonight isn't ending now. Like, do you understand? Like, seconds are happening and we're all still here. And there's really, how are you supposed to resolve that, right? Or do we resolve it after I get done signing books? How do you know when to resolve a story? It's not so tidy as just like, well, this person died, I guess we're done. They got married and they're driving off and the cans are clinking on the asphalt behind the car. That's not life. That's not how it works. All just to say I have a hard time killing characters. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the newest book? Because it says something about partly based on a true story as well.
Are you talking about Godspeed? Yeah, Godspeed. This is probably the last question I'll take, if that's okay, right? Yeah? So back in 2013, my wife and I moved back to Eau Claire. We bought a piece of property. There's this weird house on the property, but we bought it because it was adjacent to a buffalo farm. So every morning when I wake up, I get to have my cup of coffee and go look at buffalo, which is kind of like really cool if you ask me. So we started building a house, and I did not find that building a house was such a fun procedure. I don't want to complain about that because that seems like I'm privileged without understanding I'm privileged. But anybody who's built a house knows it's not really magical. Anyway, by the time we got done building the house, this family friend of mine who works in construction came over because he wanted to see the house. And he started telling me about a multi-million-dollar house that they were building south of Eau Claire. And the homeowner felt like they had slipped behind whatever perceived deadline she had for the house being done. So she gets everybody together on the building crew and said, if you guys finish this house in the next 6 weeks, I'll give you all a $15,000 bonus individually. And my buddy said, Nick, if we had all the meth in the world, we couldn't have finished that house in 6 weeks. And I thought, holy shit. Like, what kind of person offers these guys $15,000 to finish a house in 6 weeks? So where's that money coming from? Why does she need the house done in 6 weeks? What does the house look like? And oh, by the way, apparently my friend has used meth or thought about using meth to finish the project. All that seemed pretty interesting to me, right? So I was like, I think there's an idea for a novel here. But I just didn't really see it happening in Eau Claire. So my family and I like to go to national parks on our family vacations. We fly into Denver, we rent a van, and then we just go to like Arches or wherever. Not Yosemite, Yellowstone. And one time we went to Yellowstone, we're coming down south, we go into Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and we're having our coffee in Jackson. I was like, God, what a beautiful little town. Like if things don't work out in Eau Claire, maybe we could settle down here. I knew nothing about Jackson. We get out of town, I start looking at real estate listings. It's like, holy shit, how can anyone live in Jackson? At that time, the cheapest property on the market was $750,000 for like a 1-bedroom duplex that would have just been ripped down. So I was like, whoa, what if this isn't a house being built outside? What if this isn't a $2 million house outside of Eau Claire? What if it's a $20 million house being built outside Jackson? And what if instead of 6 weeks, we give these guys 6 months? And what if instead of $15,000, we give them like $250,000? And what if instead of easily completing that deadline, they sort of run behind to the point where they have to start using crystal meth to stay up all night long to finish the project? And what happens when you have a crew of guys that are on crystal meth? Probably some things are going to happen that aren't really supposed to happen. So it became, like, I love that book. And it's being shopped around Hollywood for like a limited series, TV series. But it's one of these stories, it's like a morality story where you go into it and you know something bad is going to happen to someone. You just don't know who and you don't know when. So as a reader, you kind of have this sweaty, desperate feeling as you're moving the pages like, oh God, what's going to happen? But it became this great way of talking about the American dream, about greed, about wealth disparity in America, and I love it. So, thank you.